Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in with a My Hero Academia anime viewer guide video, this time specifically covering the question that anime viewers have: what exactly did Hawks do to Best Jeanist in the most recent episode of Hero Academia? Okay, so as we know, in the most recent episode of Hero Academia, specifically Season 5, Episode 14, we saw Hawks do a very concerning thing. He was talking to Best Jeanist, and then he very menacingly pulled out a feather sword. The next thing we see, Hawks is carrying a suspiciously sized bag, and as we know from an earlier episode, Best Jeanist is missing, and that episode opened up with Dobby telling Hawks that, hey, you gotta do more if you want to get into the crew. So that would ultimately leave viewers with the question, well, what exactly is going on here? Well, in the manga, we're at chapter 318, and at this point, we know what happened to Best Jeanist more or less. So the short story is, Best Jeanist is fine, and here's the long story. As it turned out, after this very menacing scene where Hawks pulled out this practically a sword, a lot of stuff went down, and we found out the majority of the stuff in chapter 299. As Best Jeanist tells us, thanks to the best hospital in Japan, Central Hospital, Best Jeanist was made to receive a procedure that would induce a death-like state, and this procedure was inspired by the Nomu. The way Best Jeanist speaks of it implies that Central Hospital was involved. I mean, really, when you're talking about a procedure that induces a death-like state, do you think Hawks would be able to induce a death-like state with his feathers, right? So, Hospital strongly implied to be involved. Hawks tells us that he, and I quote, suggested the procedure to Best Jeanist because he needed to be able to trick the villains. Again, I don't know how a scene like this leads to a suggestion. Anyway, Hawks tells us that the reason that they had to use a procedure inspired by the Nomu was that it was the best way to ensure that they wouldn't be caught out by, say, the person that made the Nomu in the first place. Which, when you think about it, they got very lucky that the person who knows how to make Nomu and whose methods were what inspired this new method didn't notice any traces of his handiwork. Very lucky, but there's a lot of things going on here. Anyway, moving on, with Best Jeanist's body, Hawks handed it over to Dobby, and Dobby was essentially tricked. When he saw Best Jeanist's body in the bag, and yes, Hawks was carrying Best Jeanist in the bag when you see him in the scene. Anyway, when he saw it, Dobby believed Hawks actually killed someone. What happens after the handoff to Dobby, we also find out in chapter 299. Dobby went as far to confirm that Best Jeanist was in fact Best Jeanist, which just went to say that the corpse that was handed over was his, and then Dobby suggested that they keep the body in case they wanted to use it for Nomu or something, or some other Dobby-related project. This led to Best Jeanist being preserved at a secret underground facility that the Doctor most likely had. Here's the description given in the official translation. Finally, in chapter 299, we find out that Hawks retrieved the body at the perfect time, and this all led to Best Jeanist making a glorious return at the best possible moment. Now, you've got the explanation, but let's really appreciate what was going on here. Best Jeanist was okay, but did you notice the weirdness of this? Not just the very menacing Hawks, but specifically the things that Hawks did and the time at which he did them. The one that I really want to look at is that he was able to secretly retrieve Best Jeanist. The big question is, how did he manage to do this when Hawks was being so heavily surveilled? In the most recent episode, we even saw an example of how much of an eye was being kept on Hawks when a certain someone was talking about Hawks freaking out over coffee. When it came to the whole Central Hospital shenanigan of inducing a death-like state in Best Jeanist, Hawks had enough leeway, he wasn't being monitored, but it's the retrieval that was ultimately strange. The way this whole situation works when you read it is that the author only gave the broad information to the readers so that the readers could fill the blanks. And in this case, where you have to fill in the blanks is specifically with how Hawks went about secretly retrieving the body when it's assumed that he was being heavily surveilled. There's a lot of things you can do to play around with that, but that's one of those spots where it's definitely the author is hoping that we will just go along with it. For this line personally, I think it would have been okay if Hawks said that he had other people go and retrieve Best Jeanist, just because again of how much precaution Hawks had to take ultimately when it came to the situation that he was in. Anyway, the other important thing to note here from the writer perspective is the misdirect. This is the other spot that really needs reader imagination to fill in the blanks and justify why Hawks would take a sword out when he was there to suggest an option. The only thing that would really say that Best Jeanist was threatened and that he wasn't a willing participant was when he said he wasn't keen to receive it as according to the official translation. But to say that not being keen to receive something leads to someone having to pull out a sword, essentially, that's a really extreme inference. So when you look at that very menacing scene with Hawks pulling out the sword, I think in context with what we were given, I feel like it requires a little bit too much from the readers to try and make that work. But I think it makes a lot of sense if you interpret that scene as happening because the author wanted to slightly throw off the readers. When it came to Hawks at this period in time, there were some instances where it seemed like Hawks was worse than he actually was, and this was one of the scenes that ultimately led into it. Regardless, that's what happened to Best Jeanist. The well-dressed hero is good. He and Hawks are also very good, so he clearly doesn't really care about the sword being pulled out on him, and they still tend to work well together. So, anime-only viewers, I hope that answered your question. If you have any more anime questions that you would like spoiled, let me know down below. But till next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.